Half a day ago, I was playing football. Now I'm a crippled patient in a room that I share with 4 other guys. Each one had his own story. I had my sketchbook, so I took notes and drew pictures to document the situation. I kept that sketchbook for years, but the memories were too painful. I eventually burned the sketchbook in a fire to try to rid myself of the PTSD. It didn't work. The hospital ward at night has a sound all its own. A low institutional hum threaded through with the occasional squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, the muffled percussion of IV stands being wheeled down hallways, and somewhere always, just beyond the edge of sleep, the quiet suffering of strangers. I came to know that sound well during the weeks I spent in that ward, and I came to know it mostly because of the man in the bed next to mine. His name was Robert Kanickel. I remember it the way you remember the name of someone you went to war with, even if the war was small and confined to 2 beds, separated by a pale green curtain that was rarely fully drawn. You don't forget a name like that. You don't forget a man like that. Robert had been there a month by the time I arrived, which meant he had a month's head start on suffering, on boredom, on the particular brand of frustration that comes from being a grown man who cannot shift his own weight in bed without asking for help. He was in his mid-30s, I'd guess, slight and thin, the kind of man who probably bought the same size pants he wore in high school and still found them loose. He had narrow shoulders, wiry forearms, and the general build of someone the wind might argue with. There was nothing physically imposing about Robert Kanickel. In a crowd, you would not have noticed him. In that hospital bed, surrounded by the enormous scaffolding contraption that encased his leg, he looked almost comically small, a sparrow caught in a steel trap built for something much larger. And yet there was a stubbornness in him that had nothing to do with size. It lived in his eyes, which were sharp and watchful, and in the set of his thin mouth, which did not easily arrange itself into complaint, even when complaint was plainly warranted. He seemed like a man who had spent a lifetime being underestimated and had quietly made his peace with it, maybe even used it. He was not someone you would look at and think, "That man is tough." But he was. He needed quite a bit of help now, and that cost him something. The story of how he got there was one of those that sounds almost absurd until you've stood on a city street and done the same stupid thing yourself. He had been waiting for a bus, that was all. Standing at the curb on a gray afternoon, he was running late, probably impatient. Out of nowhere, a gang of 4 walks around the corner, spotting Robert alone and vulnerable. They shouted insults and warnings that ran a chill up and down his spine. He was starting to lose his shit. Beyond nervous, he had stepped out just slightly, just the smallest lean forward, to see if the bus was coming down the block. It was a reflex, the kind of thing a person does 100 times without consequence. This time a sports car below his vision was moving faster than it should have been, and it caught him. A bigger man might have been knocked down. Robert, slight as he was knocked clean out of his shoes. That detail, the shoes, was the one that stayed with me. There is something uniquely violent and violating about that image, something that strips a person of the small dignities that keep us feeling human. One moment he was a man standing on a sidewalk with his shoes on, and the next moment the shoes were there and he was not, and the world had rearranged itself permanently. Given how little of him there was to begin with, it was almost incomprehensible that he had survived it at all. The car had not slowed enough, the angle had been terrible, and Robert, narrow and light as he was, had offered almost no resistance whatsoever to the physics of the thing. He nearly died. The leg was broken so severely that the surgeons had spent hours reconstructing what the car had shattered, and the result was the extraordinary contraption that dominated his side of the room. It was like nothing I had ever seen outside of a construction site, a scaffolding of metal rods and clamps and pins that went directly into the bone, his leg suspended within this framework like a bridge under repair. Sandbags hung from pulleys attached to the apparatus, and the height and tension of those sandbags controlled the traction on the leg. The whole arrangement looked medieval. It looked like something designed for a much larger patient, and in a way that made it worse to look at. We talked during the long hours when the pain was manageable and boredom was the primary affliction. That is another thing about hospital wards that no one tells you, the boredom. Not peaceful, restorative rest, but the grinding, clock-watching tedium of a person who is awake and alert and trapped. We talked about the bus, of course, about the car, about the driver who had stopped, who had not been drunk, who had simply been going too fast and turned a fraction of a second too late. Robert did not seem to carry particular anger toward the driver. What he carried was something more complicated, a kind of bewildered accounting, the mind's endless return to the moment just before, the step off the curb that could not have been taken, the bus that he had been trying to see, and the ordinary afternoon that had become the dividing line of his life. The pulley system was the thing. To adjust the traction to give Robert even the smallest degree of relief when the pain shifted and changed, as it constantly did, the sandbags had to be moved, raised or lowered, shifted slightly, repositioned. This was not something he could do himself, as it would have required a contortion that was impossible given his situation. And the nurses, stretched thin across the ward as nurses always are, could not always come quickly when the pain crested and something needed to be adjusted now, at this moment, not in 10 minutes, not in 5. I was not in wonderful shape myself, it should be said. My own reasons for being in that ward were not trivial, but I could reach. That was the essential fact. I could stretch across from my own bed, extend my arm to its full and aching length, and get my fingers around the rope and the pulley mechanism. I became, by necessity and proximity, Robert's adjunct nurse for those small but critical adjustments. He would tell me, up a little, no, too far, back, just a hair, and I would try to find the position that gave him the most relief, which was always a negotiation, always imprecise, always only partial. Robert and I shared a room with some interesting characters. The corner bed was inhabited by an unfortunate biker who constantly barked, "Bullshit, this is bullshit."